and it just simply doesn't work. Like bloating, brain fog, fatigue, you name it, you're not feeling your best. And that's because the root causes of why the thyroid dysfunction is occurring in the first place haven't been addressed. Other hormones actually impact how our thyroid functions. The three key ones are estrogen, cortisol, and leptin. Hi, my name is Lauren Papanis. I'm a functional medicine registered dietitian who specializes in thyroid and other endocrine disorders. One of the things we commonly see in practice is patients coming to us that have been diagnosed with a thyroid disorder, such as Hashimoto's or hypothyroidism, but never done any true diagnostic deep dive to understand why the thyroid disorder occurred. And the problem with this is that then you often are placed on thyroid hormone replacement or thyroid medication, and it just simply doesn't work. And you're still left symptomatic with symptoms like bloating, brain fog, fatigue, you name it, you're not feeling your best. And that's because the root causes of why the thyroid dysfunction is occurring in the first place haven't been addressed. And so in today's video, we're going to talk through those main root causes, the hormonal connection with other hormones and the thyroid, and the functional treatment options to explore. Now, let's get into it. First and foremost, we want to ensure that there is adequate nutrients to be able to make and convert thyroid hormones. Nutrient deficiencies like selenium, iron, zinc, magnesium are key components to thyroid dysfunction. We know that an iodine and iron deficiency can actually cause hypothyroidism. So we want to ensure that the body not only has enough of these minerals in the diet or through supplementation, but that we're also absorbing these minerals efficiently. Minerals like selenium are key for helping convert T4 over to T3, which is the active form of thyroid hormones, and also helping to control something called oxidative stress that naturally occurs as our body is making thyroid hormones. This is especially important for those with autoimmune thyroid disorders like Hashimoto's. I have a podcast episode on this topic that dives deeper into the role of these nutrients in hypothyroidism. Check out episode 76 to learn more. Secondly, we always want to address gut health. Around 20% of your inactive thyroid hormone T4 is actually converted over to the active form T3 through microbes in your gut. So we want to ensure that we have a healthy gut microbiome, and also in the situation of those that may be dealing with autoimmune thyroid conditions like Hashimoto's and Graves' disease, we also want to look at factors that could be influencing gut inflammation, or what's commonly referred to as leaky gut, because we know that a leaky gut is one of three causative factors for why an autoimmune disease can be triggered in the first place. So we want to address any factors that are driving this leaky gut or intestinal permeability and inflammation in the gut. Next, we want to address the liver and our detox pathways. About 70% of our inactive thyroid hormones, T4, are actually converted over to the active form T3 in our liver. So the liver is a really key piece to the thyroid hormone conversion process. And if there is a lot of endocrine disruptors, phthalates, heavy metals, other types of environmental toxins that are weighing down the liver, this is going to pose an increased burden on the liver and make this conversion process slowed. We also want to look at infections. Infections are viruses that we've often had in the past that can then become reactivated. In the case of autoimmunity, this is incredibly important. Infections like Lyme, Epstein-Barr, and strep can actually become reactivated and pose issues to thyroid function. They do this through causing inflammation and triggering immune dysfunction, which can then trigger the autoimmune thyroid disease to develop. They can also pose an increased stress load on the HPA axis, the hypothalamus pituitary axis, which controls the brain to thyroid signaling process. So in individuals that don't have an autoimmune thyroid disease but have something like non-autoimmune hypothyroidism, this can also be something for us to address. Particularly, we see a lot of situations of mold illness causing hypothyroidism because of the stress that the mycotoxins that the mold creates place on the body. Endocrine disruptors are also a key aspect. These include things like BPA, pesticides, and phthalates, as well as parabens that are often found in our environment or through products that we may be utilizing, such as in our skincare or beauty products. These are especially problematic for the thyroid because the thyroid is very sensitive to them, and they can do something called molecular mimicry, where they can actually look very structurally similar to the thyroid. And what happens is that the immune system actually tags flags those molecules, thinking that they're the thyroid hormones when in fact they are not. And this can actually be part of what triggers that immune dysfunction and further leads to the autoimmune thyroid disease developing. And finally, we want to look at the stress and any HPA axis dysfunction. Stress can come from many different places. It's not just psychological stress. It also can include nutritional stress. It can include the stress from these infections we've talked about. It can include stress from over-exercising or not resting enough, chronic trauma and things. So there's a lot of different variables that can heighten our HPA axis. But if the HPA axis is sensing that the body is under chronic loads of stress, there's chronic cortisol production being made, it actually blocks this feedback loop that tells the brain to not then stimulate down to the thyroid. And so then that can impact our TSH, our thyroid stimulating hormone, which then in turn impacts our thyroid hormone production. And oftentimes we're going to see a drop in that free T3, that active thyroid hormone, and an increase in our inactive or deactivated form, which is called reverse T3. And this is one of the key pieces that we're going to talk about why it's so important that you have all of the information within your thyroid hormone labs to really be able to make the most informed decision on what's happening with your thyroid function. Next, let's talk about the role of hormones. Our entire endocrine system functions as a symphony, all working together very beautifully. So other hormones actually impact how our thyroid functions. The three key ones are estrogen, cortisol, and leptin. Now, you might be familiar with estrogen as it's a hormone that's made from the ovaries mainly, but can also be made from fat tissue. And this is particularly in women in their reproductive years. What we can see is if that there is elevated estrogen levels, those can actually increase thyroid globulin binding proteins, and these can actually impair the free available thyroid hormones. So we could see that there's issues with free thyroid hormone, free T3, because of the increase in these binding proteins. With cortisol, it's mainly going to activate this chronic stress response. And like I mentioned just before, this is going to cause that HPA axis dysfunction that then is going to lead to an elevation in TSH and an elevation in reverse T3, which is that deactivated form of that thyroid hormone. We don't want that reverse T3 to be elevated. And finally, leptin is one that's not as commonly talked about, but leptin is a satiety hormone, and it is an important regulator to both the reproductive system and our thyroid. It helps to be able to ensure that the thyroid axis, that brain to thyroid connection, is functioning really optimally, and that the thyroid is making hormones, converting hormones effectively. So when we see that there is low levels of leptin or something called leptin resistance, this can actually impair that TSH to T4 and T3 process from happening as it should. Now, let's get into testing and functional treatment options. We want to ensure that we always are getting complete panels when we're looking at the thyroid, at least from the initial standpoint of when the diagnosis has been made, because that really tells us the true root cause within the thyroid. But we also need to look a step deeper and more upstream to understand what's driving this thyroid dysfunction. So oftentimes if you go to the doctor, you're going to get TSH or thyroid stimulating hormone tested. Now, keep in mind that TSH is not a thyroid hormone. It is a thyroid stimulating hormone, which means that it comes from your brain and stimulates down to your thyroid to make thyroid hormones, which are T4 and T3. So that leads me to recommend that you are going to want to also include those key hormones. You're going to want TSH, T4, and T3, both the total and free levels of those hormones, as well as reverse T3, so we can see if any of those thyroid hormones are getting deactivated. And we want to, of course, rule out, is there any autoimmunity that's causing this thyroid dysfunction? And so that would be important for us to also have markers like anti-TPO antibodies, as well as anti-TG, anti-TIA antibodies, because these tell us if something like Hashimoto's or Graves' disease could be at play. Now, when we're going a step deeper to understand the root causes that are driving the thyroid dysfunction, that's where we want to look at the testing that's going to tell us about those root causes. So including something like a comprehensive stool analysis, like the GI map, is a very key aspect here. Looking at liver detoxification pathways, we can do this through testing in urine, such as through a Dutch test to understand what our phase 1 and phase 2 detoxification processes look like. But we can also test these toxin levels. We can test things like our heavy metal levels, our endocrine disruptor levels, to see if these are a variable impacting those liver detoxification processes. We also want to look at viral infections. So testing for things like Epstein-Barr, if there's been a history of living in water damage, or if you're having symptoms that might confer that this would be an area for us to investigate further, can be really important. And then also potentially looking at things like your stress response and what's happening within your other hormones, looking at things like leptin and your cortisol and your estrogen and progesterone production can paint a really valuable picture into the entire situation of what's causing the thyroid dysfunction. If you love this video and want more information like this, then you're going to love my Hormonal Inflammation Lab Decoder Guide. Link to download is below. And if you want more videos just like this, be sure to hit the bell and hit subscribe so that you can be the first to know whenever a new video drops.